There you go.
Hi everybody. Can I just, before we even start, I know how the aisle seats are always the best on the airplane, right? Can I ask everybody though who's to move in, because there's a lot of people who are going to be coming in. If you don't mind moving in, giving up your aisle seat, because we're gonna have a bottleneck in about 30 seconds when all of these people stop eating the food out there. Well, nobody even listens to me. It's like my kids. Okay, how about this one? How about this one? Can everyone take out their cell phones? Are you good? Now let's flip the... I'm not going to tell you to turn it off. That I wouldn't ask you to do, but just put it on silent. Reasonable? Is that reasonable? Thank you.
Because we don't stay for all the time, so...
Except those who aren't. That was British humor.
Put your hand up if you're not here.
So you're going to say
Actually, I put a radio down or something.
With what?
I put a radio in pocket radio.
nothing here.
Can we get it up to the see your phone 1 second?
Okay, I'm going to ask one more time. Just going to ask one more time. But if anyone is able to squeeze it. Questions to answer. Okay. Thank you all for coming. Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural Prophecy in the News conference that is sponsored by Breaking Israel News. Thank you. I'm Rabbi Tuli Weiss, the publisher of Breaking Israel News and the director of Israel 365. I want to welcome all of you who are here with us in Jerusalem at the Bible Lands Museum, and to all of you who are logged in on the internet, on live stream, or Facebook Live. Shalom and welcome to Israel. Thanks to all of our fantastic panelists who have agreed so eagerly to participate in the conference, and thanks to our sponsors, the Center for Jewish Christian Understanding and Cooperation, to Camera, Hayovel, Bridges for Peace, and the Mayor Panim Soup Kitchen for supporting our conference today. And a big thank you to the staff of Israel 365 and Breaking Israel News, and the Israel Bible, and the Yeshiva for the Nations, and the Israel Media Network for pulling off our conference today so beautifully and flawlessly. Breaking Israel News presents the latest news from a biblical perspective. That's our tagline, that's our motto. And although we are new, we only started in 2013, in late 2013, we are already the 6th largest English news site from Israel, according to our web traffic. So if you are one of our 2 million monthly readers online, or one of our 100,000 daily email news subscribers, you already know what Breaking Israel News represents. But if this is your first time hearing the words Bible and prophecy and news in the same sentence, so let me explain what today's prophecy conference is all about. There's 7 billion people in the world, right? There's 2 billion Christians, there's 1.5 billion Muslims, and there's about 15 million Jewish people in the world. It's about 3.5 billion people, half of the world, who believes in the Bible, right? Amazing. Religious Jews and Christians further believe that the Tanakh is not just a historic document relevant yesterday, but an eternal living text that's as relevant for today and for tomorrow as well. When I was a rabbi in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, so I had a morning study session where I just went page by page through the Tanakh and noticed something that I wasn't expecting. Did you know that on nearly every single page of the Tanakh it talks about Israel? I didn't know it until I did it for the first time. And I started highlighting all of the verses, and I started underlining all of the references to Israel, started flagging the page, and it really struck me. And then next thing I know, I was talking to my wife, and we were discussing this aha moment, and then we decided we got to move to Israel. Why? Because we wanted to, as religious Jews, we wanted to raise our children in the land of our forefathers. Religious people live their lives, and they make their decisions, and they look at the world through the lens of the book. And the book is all about the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and the God of Israel. So after making Aliyah, I started Israel 365, named for the Bible verse which proclaims that this is the land that the eyes of God are on from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, 365 days of the year. And today, we know that the world is shaped by social media, by digital media, which is changing very rapidly and reaching more and more people all over the world than ever and ever before. In fact, there are more eyes today that are focused on the land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year than ever before in history since the times of Tanakh. Breaking Israel News is the only news site that is dedicated to framing the news stories and current events from a biblical and prophetic perspective. Everyone in the media is discussing the conflict with the Palestinians, but our reporters and editors are interpreting the conflict with one eye in their newspaper and the other eye in the Tanakh. This week, all the news outlets are telling the stories of the Six-Day War. But Breaking Israel News is the only news site discussing how the liberation of Jerusalem is the literal fulfillment of the words of King David, the prophet Isaiah, and Zechariah. The mainstream media is struggling today with fake news and alternative facts, which we're going to discuss today. But at Breaking Israel News, we don't have alternative facts, we have the ultimate facts. We don't have fake news, we have the first and the final news. Because while everyone else is consuming their news today in an echo chamber and at a limited point in time, Breaking News is the only news site that is not afraid to contextualize current events in a way that half of the world's population can relate to and appreciate. So I'd now like to officially begin the program. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today the man who does this every day for Breaking Israel News, our prophecy features writer, Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz, to present our first panel. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Eliyahu Berkowitz. I'm a prophecy features article writer for Breaking Israel News. I'd like to thank you all for reading us online, watching online, and also for all the people who I'd like to thank our sponsors and all our panelists. It's really, really an honor to be with all these people. This is an amazing collection of them. So I'd like to introduce everyone. We have, of course, Rav Yehuda Glick from the Likud party. He's a member of Knesset. And Rav Glick is very well known for his dedication to the Temple Mount as a house of prayer for all nations. I've been waiting 2,000 years to say that. Next to Rav Yehuda is Britt Lode from Norway, and she's been working for many years to foster peace between Jews and Christians, with a focus on the connection of Christians in Israel. Thank you, Britt. And then there's David Rubin. He is the former mayor of Shiloh, and he's been working for many years to help young victims of terror. Mr. Rubin and his son were both victims of a shooting attack, so this is a labor of love for him. And then there's Dr. Mordechai Kedar. He served in the IDF intelligence for 25 years, and as a lecturer at Bar-Ilan University, he's an expert on Arab and Islamic culture and politics. Thank you, Dr. Kedar. And at the end is Jeremy Salton. He's a Knesset insider. He knows all about the Knesset from the inside. He's a campaigner and he's a leading political analyst. Okay, so we recently celebrated the 50th Jubilee anniversary of the Six-Day War, and that brief war had enormous impact on Israel's history. But many Jews and Christians considered it to be not only a momentous geopolitical event, but also a miracle of biblical proportions. And they believed that the Israel victory signified the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, opening up the way for prophesied end of days. The decisive victory against overwhelming odds led many around the world to focus on events from Israel with a renewed religiously based interest. And once Jerusalem was a semi-mythical city occasionally fought over, but never actually treated as a treasured city. Jerusalem has finally claimed its spot as the center of the world's attention. Religious media, both Christian and Jewish, and mainstream media have focused their attention on Jerusalem, and more specifically, the Temple Mount.
So, Rav Yehuda, the first question for you is, as a member of Knesset and a close follower of the political situation and the religious movement in Israel, can you explain the changes you've seen in how the religious aspects of the Temple Mount are viewed differently today by the Jews than they were in the past?
Okay. First of all, from the first on the row, I just want to take the advantage of, in the same name of all of us, thank you for Israel 365, Breaking Israel News, for organizing this wonderful conference. I just say that it's definitely not a kunz to talk about prophecy and the news way after the establishment of the State of Israel and after the return to Jerusalem. Let's see you do it if you do it in 2,000 years of exile, writing news in the prophecy. Today, if you don't see prophecy, you better buy yourself a new pair of glasses, because the second point I wanted to point out, we're not celebrating 50 years of the Six-Day War, because we don't celebrate remembering wars. We're celebrating 50 years of the victory of the Six-Day War. And that is something very important, because it happens to have been the greatest victory of the Jewish people ever since the establishment of the people of Israel. But I don't want to steal too much time. I will point out that in our history as a nation, we see that when you see major revolutions taking place, they don't come from on top. It's never the rabbis or the religious leaders or any kind of leaders leading the people. It's the simple people and it happened in every single revolution I can put my finger on, whether it was the Haskalah, Enlightenment, whether it was the Zionist movement, whether it was the feministic movement. You never saw rabbis leading it. As a matter of fact, you saw the most modern, open-minded rabbis in the world. Rav Kook, 80 years ago, writes an answer that by no means can any woman participate in elections. And today, let me see any rabbi dare to put out a psak like that. But Baruch Hashem, because that's the world. Because the world is not static. The world is dynamic. And things happen. And the same as was mentioned with the Zionist movement and the feministic movement and the Hasidic movement. By the way, if you read what rabbis wrote about Hasidic rabbi leaders, there's some very nasty remarks. But today, nobody would write anything like that, because that's the way things work. God has the world changing by a process, not in one day. Ever since 6,000 years ago, there's never been a Big Bang, right? What I want to say is that the majors, and so what we see here, the great Big Bang we had was 50 years ago, when out of the blue, with no preparation at all, with nobody expecting it, where Israel was confronting one of the most major dangers of very, very much of its existence. Our Secretary of State, Abba Eban, was running around the world begging, let us please survive. During the war, we were begging, let's stop it, let's stop it here. But God had other plans. And when we returned back to Jerusalem, and then we began building, just like there's what's called in Hebrew, Atchalta de Geula, I don't know how to say it in English, but just like there's an Atchalta de Geula on the physical level, on the level of establishing the state, as we call Joseph's Messiah, meaning the Messiah from the tribe of Joseph. There is also an Atchalta de Geula when you're talking about King David's Messiah, the Davidian Messiah. And that we're talking about a much spiritual level. And here we see, in the past decade or two, a major change. When I started going up to Temple Mount 25 years ago, there were in a whole year we had 100 Jews ascending Temple Mount. Now we have 100 daily. Just last week on Jerusalem Day we had 1,000, which was the highest record, and the numbers are growing. Now I can of course point out a few things that caused it, but those are coincidences, because if it wouldn't have been Mark Zuckerberg, it would have been somebody else, because the fact that we have social media, the fact that we have people connecting, the fact that we could have put a finger on the major crisis of Gush Katif. Many things caused it, but it's happening, and it's happening from on bottom. And as I said, when I began 25 years ago, we were supported by 3 rabbis. Today we have more than 300 rabbis, and today it's in the mainstream. And today I'm in the Knesset. And here's I'm going to conclude. When I call my office, not Office of Member Knesset Yehuda Jerusalem of Peace, I call my office Jerusalem of Peace and my website JerusalemPeace.com, and I say, guys, we're actually doing what Isaiah told us to do. We're like, little off schedule, 2,000 years late. But when you look at it and we see and you say, Ezekiel, the bones aren't dry anymore. Jeremiah, Jerusalem is not isolated anymore. Zechariah, not only children are playing in the streets, hundreds and thousands of children are playing in the streets. And you say, Ezekiel, your final verses of the third temple, of the temple which will be a house of prayer for all nations, which none of us can actually predict how it will be. They're happening in front of our eyes. So if you want to join us, follow what we're doing, either what I'm doing or what other people that here are doing, the Temple Mount organizations, Temple Mount Heritage Foundation. There's so many different organizations that everyone is students for the Temple Mount, women for the Temple Mount. It's all coming with people are doing it from what they're doing. Follow in, tune in, keep tuned to what we're doing, what's happening. Either going to my website at JerusalemPeace.com or follow Israel 365, Breaking Israel News, and you'll know everything that's happening all the time.
Thanks very much. Reed, you've recently authored a book, The Light from Zion, in which Orthodox rabbis are teaching Torah specifically to Christians. This spiritual symbiosis between religious Jews and Christians is truly unprecedented. How do you think modern-day Israel played a role in bringing about this relationship, this symbiotic relationship? And what role do you think Israel, and specifically Jerusalem, will play in how this relationship develops?
First of all, I will say thank you for inviting me and having me here today. And I feel very honored to be on this panel with really honored people and together with all of you. I came from Norway. I left Norway yesterday and came to Jerusalem with my rental car 4 in the morning today. So I hope I'll be able to keep my focus. Modern day Israel, yes. I will start to tell about my aunt, because my aunt went to Israel for the first time when I was 1 year old. That was in 1976. And I only knew that she went there. I didn't know why she went to Israel and what was her motivation. So I called her up before this conference because I thought it could be interesting to know. And she said since she was a little girl and went to Sunday school and hear about all the Bible stories, she had a desire to go to Israel. And 9 years after Jerusalem was delivered and got back on Jewish hands, she was able to fulfill her dream. And she told, even if this is more than 40 years ago, she could remember every single thing. And she told me with so much enthusiasm about her trip 40 years ago. And she went to the temple, not the Temple Mount, but she went to the Kotel. She went to all the holy places in Jerusalem. And when she came back, I have still a necklace she brought when I was 1 year old. She also brought things from Israel. She took, back then there were no cell phones, things like that, so she brought slides. And she went around to friends and family and congregations and showed this, because you couldn't go into internet and just Google Israel or Jerusalem back then. So I believe that the modern Israel have had huge impact on the Christian world, because then we finally could see what is this land. And those who went to Israel came back with pictures, with stories, and this was very useful to change the image of what Israel and the Jews was. And another thing that have changed it very much, and we also was talking about outside here before, it's about the replacement theology. And that is, I think, the main thing that have changed and have made huge changes. I have a story from Norway, and I think that is an example that can be found in many other countries around the world. Because since the 1920s, we had a professor at the theological faculty in Oslo. His name was Professor Ola Hallesby. And as long as he was the professor until the State of Israel was established, he told his students and other people he went around and spoke with that the old covenant with the Jews was no longer effective. It was replaced by a new one, and the physical Israel was replaced by the spiritual Israel. That Israel would never get their land back. Israel, as God's chosen people, was come to an end, and also the old covenant. He said that an Israeli state on biblical ground was for all time gone. And he was studying all the priests that went out and led the Christian congregations in Norway. And you can think the huge impact this had for all the Christian people in Norway. After the establishing of the Jewish state, he was so humble that he actually went out and apologized. But still the damage was done. So I think for the replacement theology, that the State of Israel and that Jerusalem went back on Jewish hands was crucial. So since that, together with a lot of other things, I think the social media have done a lot of things. I think the globalizing of the world, that we travel much more. We come and see. We send out emails. We send out snaps. We are on Facebook. Israel is no longer just a distant place that you don't have the money to go there. It's too dangerous to travel over there. It's easy to access, and it's more easy to change people's mind because you get the information. And slowly, slowly, the people that woke up from the replacement theology, they understand and here is something else. Here is something more, and they start to study the Bible. They start to went to Israel. And they find out another truth. They found out another reality. And like a friend said, today we see so many people waking up. You have different kind of movements, like the Messianic movement, the Hebrew root movement, but all of them is that they try to put the replacement theology aside. Still, the theology, the replacement theology, is so strong in our mind, but slowly, slowly, we are walking another direction. So I absolutely think that the modern day Israel played a huge role for doing this book that you said, The Light from Zion, where 12 Orthodox rabbi is teaching Torah specifically to pro-Israel Christians.
Okay, thanks very much, Brit. That's amazing. David, you were the mayor of Shiloh, the city that preceded even Jerusalem as a dwelling place for the Shekhinah, for the presence of God. There's a lot of focus in the news about the violence surrounding the reemergence of Shiloh, of all of Yehud and Shomron, violence that you've experienced firsthand. Taken in a context of prophecy, thinking about Israel as a biblical nation that has special and specific goals and processes, how does the conflict in Shiloh and the related political processes connect with prophecy?
Well, thank you. I heard Rabbi Tully before when he opened the conference, and he said that he referred to fake news. So I want to make something very clear from the start. President Trump did not invent the concept of fake news. Way before that, there was the the concept of the West Bank. And I'm happy that I have an opportunity to speak about that a little bit. But I speak in a lot of churches and other places, and very often I begin by asking people, how many of you have heard of the West Bank? And of course every hand goes up. And then I say, how many of you have read about it in your Bibles? And usually there are a few hands that go up, and then they quickly pull it down because they realize that there is no West Bank written about in the Bible. And so it's important to understand what we're talking about here. Okay, everyone's talking about 50 years since the miraculous Six-Day War, and which was indeed miraculous, but at the same time, they're focused. All the focus is on Jerusalem, and of course, Jerusalem is the holy city. Jerusalem is the eternal, undivided capital of the state of Israel, of the people of Israel. But very often, and especially when I'll hear the world leaders, the politicians, and even our own prime minister talking about 50 years, all the focus is on Jerusalem. And I don't hear that much focus on Judea, which is the region south of Jerusalem, and Samaria, which is the region north of Jerusalem. Shiloh is located in the heart of Samaria. Now, Shiloh is referred to in the book of Bereshit, Genesis. It says in chapter 49, verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh comes, and his will be an assemblage of nations. Well, all the biblical commentators teach us that Shiloh means Messiah. So, interesting question. Why does Shiloh mean Messiah? Well, if you look at the Gemara, the Talmud, it refers to Shiloh. It says, and it also refers to Jerusalem. It says, El menucha ve'el nachala, to the resting place and to the inheritance. And then it goes on to explain the resting place, that is Shiloh, the inheritance, that is Jerusalem. So what does that mean? Well, in biblical times, Shiloh was the capital of ancient Israel. Joshua set up the Mishkan, the tabernacle in Shiloh, and he spoke to the Israelites, and he said, how long will you wait before coming to take possession of the land that the Lord God of your fathers has given you? Those words that Joshua spoke in those times weren't just spoken for the Israelites of that time, and they weren't even just spoken for the Israelis of this time, and they weren't even spoken just for the Israelis and the American Jews and all the other Jews around the world of this time, many of whom unfortunately are out of touch with their biblical roots. They were spoken, those words, that commandment to be involved, at least in a supporting role in rebuilding the land of Israel, the biblical heartland of Israel, was spoken for everyone that understands that God's presence is on this land. So if you look back at the biblical time when the tabernacle stood, the capital city of Shiloh, before Jerusalem even existed, for 369 years, where Hannah came to pray for a son, where Samuel the prophet grew up as a result of her prayers, and he went on to appoint the first two kings of Israel, Saul and David. David set up the unified kingdom in Jerusalem, and his son Solomon built the holy temple in Jerusalem. Well, we're going through a similar chronological period in our times today. The whole world talks about the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Why is all the focus on this little, interestingly embryo-shaped area called Judea and Samaria? Well, maybe because it's the cradle of Western civilization, and maybe because it is pivotal in what is happening today. No, Judea and Samaria are not an obstacle to peace, but they are, and I'm very proud to say, are an obstacle to a Palestinian state. So when it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar from his descendants until Shiloh comes, that Shiloh means Messiah, because we know that the Messiah is going to be pivotal in defeating Israel's enemies, uniting all of Israel under his leadership, and rebuilding the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So that is the process. To the resting place, that is Shiloh, which represents the biblical heartland of Israel, the so-called West Bank, and to the inheritance, which is Jerusalem, where the Holy Temple will be rebuilt, and where all of the nations will come, as it says in the book of Isaiah, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim, because my house will be called the house of prayer for all of the nations. All of the nations will be coming here to worship God's holy name together. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Dr. Kedar, as an expert in Islam, many difficult questions land exactly at your doorstep. One of the biggest obstacles to keeping Jerusalem united, allowing it to become a house of prayer for all nations, is the Islamic claim to a monopoly on the Temple Mount. This religious battle is being fought not only with knives in the streets of Jerusalem, but more powerfully in the media. In this battleground, it seems the Western secular media has taken up the cry of jihad against Israel. Do you agree with this? And could you tell us about this relationship between the Islamic jihad and the media?
Well, as Rabbi Tully mentioned before, we are now witnessing the industry of fake news. Let me give you a real news. Islam in Jerusalem is a fake news since the 7th century. The whole idea of Jerusalem as a holy city for Islam was invented by the Umayyads, who controlled the Islamic world between 661 CE and 750, means like 90 years, and they sanctified Jerusalem as an alternative place for pilgrimage, for Hajj, instead of Mecca, because of a rebellion which erupted in Mecca in the year of 682. 682, 50 years after Muhammad died. So they took a verse in the Quran which talks about the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which originally was between Mecca and Taif, two cities in the Arabian Peninsula, and they actually moved the Al-Aqsa from the Arab Peninsula to Jerusalem in order to give a seal of approval to their decision to divert the Hajj from Mecca to Jerusalem. And this is the whole thing about Jerusalem. And they invented thousands of stories about the sanctity of Jerusalem, including the night journey, the nocturnal journey of Muhammad, which is mentioned in the Quran, as if it was to Jerusalem, in order to show that Jerusalem is actually more holier than Mecca. So the whole thing about the sanctity of Jerusalem in Islam is based on a rebellion, or I would say a struggle within Islam between the center of Damascus and the center of Mecca. So this is the whole thing. It was fake news then. So the Shia did not agree to view Jerusalem as holier than any other city, and for them the third place in holiness after Mecca and Medina is the city of Najaf in the southern part of Iraq. The Shia, which are 16% of Islam, do not agree, but traditionally, that Jerusalem is holier than any other city like Cairo or Alexandria or Damascus or Beirut. Okay? So it's already a sign that it was something fishy about this thing. This is where the beginning of the fake news started, and surprisingly, even Sunni Muslims, some scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah and Razali, who lived in the Middle Ages, knew that this was all fake news, and they actually viewed Jerusalem as a regular city, not any holier than any other city like Beirut and Damascus. So this is already then, and Muslims discovered this fake news before many others. This is one thing. Fast forward to recent times. In 1925 and 6 and 7 and 30 and 32, I think, the Grand Mufti of Palestine, the Mufti Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was a great Jew hater, he took part in the extermination of the Jews of Hungary in 1944. He published a brief guide to Al-Haram al-Sharif in English. It's a booklet which was directed to more or less British tourists, because this country was occupied by Britain. And in order to bring more tourists to this country, he published this book in English. And in this book, he writes explicitly that the Haram al-Sharif, means the Temple Mount, is actually the place of Solomon's temple. This is what he admits. In that book, you can download it for free. I could show you it on screen. Another thing, Jordanian maps, which were produced until 1967, talk about the Temple Mount as a Mount Moriah, no less. M-O-R-I-A-H. I don't know how to read it otherwise. It's Mount Moriah, Har Moriah in Hebrew, until 1967. Today, the fake news is that the whole thing is Al-Aqsa. They don't mention anymore Mount Moriah in any map today. And this change of the maps is only because the Jews who have to live under, just like Christians, have to live under Islamic rule as dhimmis and pay the jizya while they are humiliated according to the Quran. All of a sudden they have a state, sovereignty, and an army, and they actually occupy. And this is actually a theologic threat on Islam. Because as you mentioned, theory of replacement, according to Islam, Islam came to the world to replace both Judaism and Christianity. Judaism and Christianity are din al-batil, means religion of falsehood, while Islam is din al-haq, means religion of truth. All of a sudden, these Jews are coming, occupying Palestine as it was until 67. Again, they come and they occupy the West Bank, as they called it, and Jerusalem, and all the activity of Jews in Jerusalem is actually viewed as a threat on the raison d'etre of Islam, which came to the world to replace both. So this is why, by the way, they object so firmly that Jews pray on the Temple Mount, because this is actually what signifies the returning of the Jews, the resurrection of Judaism, which came after the destruction of the Romans. And this is why they changed the maps from Mount Moriah to Al-Aqsa, as it is today, in order to pull the rug under the Jewish claim to this place, which is based on archaeology, books of Greeks and Romans and many others, before it is Jewish books, and so forth. Because they think that this is a threat on the mere existence of Islam, because Islam was, or Muhammad at the beginning, was accused that the whole Islam is asatir al-awwalin, means the stories or the legends or the fables of the first ones, means Jews and Christians. And this is what they are afraid today, that if Judaism comes back to life and Christianity supports it, all the jokers will come back and say, as the people of Mecca said to Muhammad, that the whole Islam is no more than fake news. So this is why they objected. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kedar. Dr. Jeremy, you're a keen observer of politics in Israel, but you're also an observant Jew. So considering the 67 victory and its after effects, do you feel that framing Israeli politics in religious terms is valid, or perhaps even more valid than a strictly secular approach? Do you see a religious perspective on Israeli history and politics being manifested today, actually?
Thank you for the question. I want to start out by thanking Breaking Israel News, Israel 365, all of our sponsors, Rabbi Tuli, Mayan, everyone that's involved with the organization, the sponsors. I also want to thank all of the panelists for your amazing insights. I also want to thank you, the people in the audience, for coming to hear us. And for those of you that are not here as Israelis, I want to welcome you to Jerusalem, the undivided eternal capital of our homeland. Thank you. Now, to answer that question, it's always been difficult for me to understand those that try to separate the secular and religious framework of the foundation of this country. It was the secular people who founded this country who decided to revive the language of Hebrew, the language of the Bible. That wasn't the religious people, that was the secular people. There were people who objected. They said, no, let's keep speaking Yiddish, and it was actually the secular people who adopted the religious narrative and said, let's bring back the language of the Bible. The parliament that M.K. Yehuda Glick sits in, called the Knesset, is not just a place where you go and gather. It was named after the Great Assembly, Anshe Knesset Agdolah, during the time that we lived here in our homeland over 2,500 years ago when we had the temple in Jerusalem. Now, what is the symbol that they decided to choose for the state of Israel? They decided to choose the menorah from the temple. They decided to choose for the national anthem that the final verse would be that we want to be a free people in our homeland in Jerusalem. Now, beyond that, we have the flag, which has the colors of the Talit, which has the Star of David, the Jew who came and conquered Jerusalem so that we could go ahead and create our temple here. Everything is centered around Jerusalem, and the secular narrative is pretty much the religious narrative without a hand covering. It's the same stuff, they just might not observe Sabbath the way that you and I do. So when I go ahead and I think about what that connection is and how that manifests today, because we do have a different secular generation today than we did on the foundation of the state. And yes, some of them have some different views and some of them have different, I would say, approaches towards the connection that we have between religion and state. But yet, what are the four non-biblical holidays that we celebrate in Israel? Holocaust Remembrance Day, Israeli Memorial Day, right, Yom HaZikaron, Israel Independence Day, and Jerusalem Day. And there's this sort of feeling that you get when you go through the educational system here, where the teachers sort of guide you between those four holidays. And I wish I had the time, and I know that I don't, to go through each one of them and their significance, but to spend some time on Jerusalem, since that's the question and that's the hour that we're in right now. The fact that the pinnacle is Jerusalem is not, it's not by accident. It's not a coincidence. We went through everything that we went through over the last 2,000 years so that we could come back here and be in our home. Now, Zionism is an interesting word, and I challenge my secular friends that try to have a revisionist outlook in terms of the foundation of the country and the future that they want. I ask them this: how can you call yourself a Zionist and ask to divide Zion? It's an impossible thing. Now, to finish up, I want to address something. There was a waiver that was signed, and I know a lot of people are upset about that. Now, we heard a lot about the West Bank, right, from the mayor of Shiloh. We heard a lot about the Six-Day War. We heard a lot about what those 1967 borders were, what the Six-Day War, symbolized. I'd like to take a step back. I'd like to see a time where, before we recognize some 67 lines, let's recognize the 1949 lines. I would like to call on all of the friends of the state of Israel to recognize Jerusalem as our capital. It's not our capital from 1967, and it's not our capital from 1948 or 1949. Jerusalem is our capital for 3,000 years practically. And it's about time that you guys recognize that and stop making excuses. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I'd like to thank all our panelists for really amazing answers. It's really mamash the emet, the truth. Thank you.
Shalom, shalom, everybody. We're gonna move on to the next session here. We'll have some opportunity for questions in some of the other sessions as we get on track with time.
Hi, everybody. My name is Abra Foreman. I am the editor-in-chief of Breaking Israel News. That's good? Okay. I'm very glad to have you all here, and I'd like to send a special welcome to the people who are watching at home on the live stream. Our second panel today is entitled Reporting on Israel in a World of Fake News and Media Bias. Most of the people in this room and anyone who is familiar with media coverage of Israel is aware of the deep and abiding anti-Israel agenda that holds our people, army, and government to absurd double standards. It makes it very difficult for the truth to get out. Israel is constantly slandered, often with fabricated news stories, made-up statistics, and outright propaganda. And Israel's defenders in journalism and social media face a constant uphill battle to change the story. With us today to discuss how the pro-Israel media fights back, we have four very qualified panelists. So I'll introduce them now. First, we have Mark Zell, who is the co-chairman of Republican Overseas Israel, an international lawyer who works to fight intense media bias, specifically regarding the Trump administration and Israel in the public forum. We have Marnie Blom, director of the faith-based news website Acts News Network, and she's spent 20 years reporting on stories surrounding religion and the Middle East for many distinguished media outlets. We also have with us Tamar Sternthal, who is the director of the Israeli branch of the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, or CAMRA, as many of you may know it, which is an international organization dedicated to fighting media bias against Israel by closely monitoring major news sources and publications for inaccuracies and bias against Israel. And then next to Tamar, we have Alex Trayman, who is a professional journalist currently writing for JNS, a newswire service delivering Jewish and Israeli news to international Jewish, Christian, and secular media. And and last, we have Amos Ayal, who is the CEO and founder of Tatzpit Press Service, TPS, an international Israeli news organization which distributes news about Israel to over 180 leading media outlets around the world. Warm welcome, and let's get started. First question is from Mark Zell. Mark, you were deeply involved in the successful Trump campaign in Israel, and you worked very hard to show Israelis and Jews that this is a pro-Israel administration. How has media bias against Israel evolved regarding U.S.-Israel relations in the Trump era? Do you find more or less misinformation in the media?
Well, thank you, Abra, and thank you all for having me here today. I think I'm the only one up here that's not a journalist, isn't that right? And I spend most of my time as the head of the Republican Party here in Israel contending with the media. In fact, I've made kind of a sport of it with, if you've heard me on some of the Israeli radio and television programs, I've kind of made set a new standard for attacking them when they all begin to report what Mordechai Kedar called fake news on a regular basis. And it's been a great privilege to do that. But turning to your question, I don't think that there's been anything quite like the Trump administration in terms of dealing with the media, and particularly what they call the mainstream media. This president has really set new standards all across the board about explaining to the public and showing to the public through his own actions how the mainstream media has been misinforming the public on a regular basis about not only issues concerning us here in Israel and the Middle East, but around the world and in the United States itself. The president, in my view, who's received a lot of criticism for his tweeting exercises between 3 and 4 in the morning, whenever he does it, is really setting an important new standard, again, for reaching out to the public at large directly and not having his message filtered through the media. In this way, he's doing something that's very much akin to what Franklin Roosevelt, the president, did in the 1930s when he took to the airwaves on the radio for the first time in his fireside chats in order to explain his programs during that time to the American public directly. When it comes to Israel, though, I'm not sure to what extent the media has evolved during the age of Trump, but I can say that the age of Trump has, I think, caused the media to take stock of its own set of values and information. One of the things that we've done both in Washington and here is to try to confront this flow of misinformation that the media has decided to send to the public, particularly about the President of the United States. I don't think we've ever seen anything quite like it. Almost on a daily basis, from minute to minute, from hour to hour, the media, the mainstream media, CNN, the American broadcasting companies, the New York Times, the Washington Post, is engaged in a determined campaign to delegitimize this administration. This happened long before he took office. It happened during the campaign. It happened after the November 8th election. It happened during the transition period. It is continuing to happen today, with the memes being now nothing less than the impeachment and of the President of the United States in order to remove him from power and upset the entire constitutional system and the will of the American voters. One of the things that we're trying to do on a daily basis is to confront this effort. Now, for us here in Israel, and this is a program about Israel and the Jewish people, the task that we have before us is especially important. You know that when the president visited here just the other week, There was all kinds of news about how he was going to fail and that he was going to cause all kinds of problems both in the Arab world and Israel. There were all kinds of predictions of how he was going to be reneging on his campaign promises, and I want to talk in just a couple seconds about the whole issue of the Israeli moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It turns out that something that very few people noted in the media happened just by the fact that he included Israel on his first trip abroad. This was a very significant promise that he made that many among the public simply disregarded, said there was a lot of posturing that he made during the election. The President of the United States indeed included Israel on his first trip outside the borders of the United States. It was an historic thing. The second thing that this president did, again, against all predictions, is he was the first sitting president to go to the Western Wall in that capacity. Now, I will tell you that had something to do with this. When the administration, when the folks in the State Department who were organizing this trip initially talked about him visiting the wall, they insisted that he not meet with any Israelis during that visit. And one of the things that we did, the Republicans overseas and together with our other friends, is we convinced them that it was extremely important that he meet with the Chief Rabbi Rabinovich of the Wall and his assistant, and that's something that happened so that nobody could say that this was somehow a private visit to the most holy site in Jerusalem of the president, a sitting president of the United States. He went to the wall in that capacity. There's no such thing, ladies and gentlemen, as a sitting president of the United States going to the Western Wall as a private citizen. And the very fact that he went to the wall as the sitting president of the United States for the first time in history was an important statement about how this administration sees Jerusalem and its holy sites, in particular the Western Wall, as part of the state of Israel. Now, people will say, why didn't he say that? Why didn't he come out and actually say that? And the reason he didn't is because, and this is related to the embassy, and I'll finish up in a second. This president, perhaps the first president in a long time, or maybe the only one, understands the reality of the Middle East in a way that no one else has. He understands that the central problem in the Middle East is not the struggle between the Palestinian Arabs and Israelis. The central problem in the Middle East is an existential threat posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran and its surrogates in the region, Hamas and Hezbollah and others, the Houthi in Yemen, and that the only way that this existential threat can be dealt with effectively is by a close coordination, a coalition, if you will, between Israel and the Sunni Arab states in the region. Now, this is an extraordinary thing that's happening. The whole face of the map is changing, and this president is behind it. He understands that for that to happen, it is extremely important that the Israeli-Palestinian issue not be thrust into the foreground of the geopolitical situation. And that's why he was downplaying some of the things that we were looking for him to say about Jerusalem, about the embassy moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I can tell you from inside information that the President of the United States wrestled with that latter question about the move of the embassy to Jerusalem up until the very last minute of the June 1st deadline under the President Obama waiver. This president will move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This president believes, thank you, this president believes, like we've heard here already today, that Jerusalem is the eternal and undivided capital of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And that is what he said and Vice President Mike Pence said when they both gave specially recorded remarks for our Jerusalem rally before the election. That is what he's intending to do. He's going to do it according to his own time schedule, but he will do it. And he will do it despite all attempts of the media to try to portray what his policy as some kind of a reversal or a zigzag or a denial of the promises he made to the public. That is not going to happen. This president, and this is how I'll finish now, believes, as Steve Bannon indicated, maniacally in keeping his promises to the voters. That means keeping the promise to move the embassy to Jerusalem. It will happen sooner than later. And keeping the promise to recognize Jerusalem, not only by his acts and visiting the Kotel as a sitting president, but in words as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move on to Marnie now. Marnie is a veteran journalist. You've been reporting on religious news for over 2 decades. Why is religious media coverage of Israel so vitally important? How can faith-based reporting change the negative dialogue about Israel?
First of all, Albert, thank you so much for having me, inviting me to be a part of this conference, and for sitting on this panel. And I think I'm the only one on this panel who's an evangelical Christian, is that correct? Yep. And so I'm going to be speaking, yay, from the perspective of an evangelical Christian. But first of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory on myself. I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto, and I happened to grow up on a street where there were, oh, there's a Torontonian back there. Happened to grow up on a street where there were only 2 non-Jewish families on that street. Bathurst, well, actually close to, it was more close to Bayview. You know Toronto? Yeah. It's not that way now anymore, but back when I was growing up in the 70s, there was only 2 non-Jewish families, one of which was my family. We were Protestant, Christian, and the other family was Catholic Italian Mafia. We lived across the street. I never did see Mr. Pucci, only read about him in the newspaper, but he lived there, we knew that. And so I grew up with Jewish neighbors, Jewish friends, Jewish classmates, and so I always had appreciation for my Jewish friends. Actually, I never felt different. I always felt that we had something in common, a strong bond. And so actually coming to Israel and being amongst my Israeli friends and my Jewish friends here, I actually do feel very much at home. But I'm going to be speaking from an evangelical Christian perspective. So why is it so important to us, this nation Israel and the Jewish people? Actually, I think Israel is important, not just to the Jewish people and the Christians, the evangelicals, but Israel is so important, vitally important for all nations, for the world. So, yes. So I'm going to give you 3 clear points that I'm going to roll them out in my answer here. And the first point is that I believe Israel is a litmus test of the heart. A litmus test of the heart of the individual, a litmus test of the heart of a community as well as a nation. So what exactly do I mean? Well, let's see. About 3 years ago, a world leader came and visited Israel. I'm not going to tell you who it is because I'm sure I'm going to offend some people, but I'm going to tell you that the jury was out for me in terms of what was really going on in the heart of that world leader. So I watched him. We get a feed as journalists, so I watched his day-by-day, play-by-play, all the places that he went, the people he met, the things that he did, the photo ops, and I must say my final analysis of that particular leader was that I came to the conclusion that my original suspicions were true, in that I really was not convinced of his genuine nature and his heart because I saw the way he treated Israel. And I saw the response of the Israelis and the sting. When he left, it was like he had slapped the Israelis in the face. And so that, for me, convicted me or convinced me of what was going on inside in his heart. Israel is a litmus test of the heart. And I just actually was in Europe a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, people ask me all the time, where are you from? And most people think I'm from the United States. I love the United States, but I am Canadian. And I love Canada too. And because I was coming from Israel, and I've lived here now for a number of years, I said I've come from Israel. And I say that specifically. Why? Because I get a glimpse of what's going on in their heart. And either it's a love oh, Israel, wonderful. Where do you live? I live in Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, that's so fantastic. You're so blessed and lucky. Or I can get another completely different reaction, as probably many of you get as well. But I do that on purpose. Why? Because I get a glimpse into the individual's heart. Secondly, why Israel is so important is because it's a prophetic timepiece. It's a prophetic timeline. 24 years ago, when I started out in television, the senior producer of the Crossroads Christian Communications Show, it's a daily Christian, evangelical Christian television program that I was a part of, that I was a producer and a reporter. We had a meeting, and the senior producer, he said to us and said to me something that stuck with me, and he said, the camera frames out far more than what it frames in. In other words, when you're creating a story, we need to position that camera strategically and intentionally so that we tell the greater story. So in other words, okay, so if this is our event and we just focus in on one corner of the entire, we could slant what's really actually happening. So not that we're telling a mistruth, but by the way that we position our camera and angle our camera, we can actually bring across something that is not entirely the whole truth. And so we need to be intentional and we need to be strategic so that we tell the whole story. And so that's what I've been trying to do. Now, like I said, I'm an evangelical Christian, so for me, if let's say I got an exclusive in the greatest interview ever, what would that be? Well, it would be the ultimate prophetic event, which for me is the coming of Messiah. And for me, because I'm evangelical, I believe it's the return of the Messiah. I know my Jewish friends believe it's his first coming, and that's okay. When he comes, one of us will say, told you so. Actually, I don't think we'll be saying that. I think we'll be so in awe of his coming. And but we agree on that point, and that's a great. I mean, for me, that's the ultimate prophetic event. And but before that happens, we know from scriptures, from the wonderful Hebrew scriptures as well as the New Testament scriptures, there are going to be other events that are also significant that are pointing to this ultimate prophetic event, and I call those prophetic signposts. So when I am strategically placing my camera, when I am figuratively and literally, I am looking for those prophetic signposts, those events that point ultimately to the coming of Messiah. And so of all nations in the world, there is one nation that serves as a gauge from which we can monitor the unfolding of the prophetic events. And of course, that's this nation Israel and the people of Israel in Israel and also outside of Israel. So whether or not I'm doing a story about water technology in Israel, or Christians that are out on the fields of Samaria harvesting the grapes, or about the exponential growth of French Aliyah, I'm always looking for, some of those have really profound prophetic signposts, and some of them are not quite so profound, but yet I try for all my stories to include them. Okay, so they're flashing me. I need to wrap this up. Another thing quickly, I'll just make this point. I could talk for a long time on this, but Israel is also for me a flashing beacon of God's character, and especially his faithfulness. So when I learn about Israel, when I do stories about Israel, and I see the miracles that happen in the face of war and missiles, and when I'm seeing the blessing on the land and I'm seeing the fulfillment of Scripture, it just speaks to me of God's faithfulness, and it draws me as an evangelical closer to God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the God of Israel, who is also the God whom I love. And lastly, I'll just throw this in because this is usually what people start with. When we bless Israel, we get blessed. And so that's another reason why we always want to posture ourselves to be a blessing to the nation and the people of Israel.
Thank you so much, Marnie. Thank you. It was lovely. Okay, we're moving on to Tamar. Tamar, in your experience, rooting out inaccuracies and bias against Israel in the media, is there anything new about today's phenomenon of fake news as it relates to Israel and the Middle East conflict? and how has social media impacted how fake news and media bias spreads?
Thank you for that question, Abra, and it's an honor to be here with my co-panelists, and thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us today. CAMRA, or Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, was founded in 1982 during the First Lebanon War, and I've been with the organization since 1999. That's before the beginning of social media. So I can say with 100% certainty that there's nothing new about fake news. And I'd like to give you some examples. Going back to 1994, there was an aspiring student journalist at Arizona State University who wrote a first-person account that she published in her campus newspaper describing how she herself saw Orthodox Jews stoning to death a paraplegic Jew for using his electric wheelchair on the Sabbath at the Western Wall. And she wrote with great intensity and detail about the smell of the blood and seeing the poor man fall from his wheelchair dying. And the entire piece was 100% fabrication. But it's not just the amateurs who were peddling in fake news back in the 90s. It was also the New York Times. There was a piece in 1994 which reported that Palestinian men in the Gaza Strip were arrested for carrying slices of watermelon because the fruit bears the same colors as the Palestinian flag. Green, white, and red. I kid you not. I have it right here. The Times was forced to retract this preposterous story. 1 decade earlier, in 1983, the New York Times, again the paper of record, published a series of stories about hundreds of Palestinian girls in Tulkarm and in Jenin who fell ill with symptoms of dizziness, nausea, troubles with their vision, and it was a whole series of articles in the Times. The first of the articles said that the girls were poisoned, stated that as fact. And indeed, the Palestinian accusation was that Israel had used poison gas on these children. Well, the Israeli Ministry of Health launched an investigation, followed by a separate investigation by the American Center for CDC, for Disease Control, and both found that no organic substance caused these symptoms and that they were the result of mass hysteria. Again, the New York Times was forced to publish a lengthy editor's note, both fixing many factual problems and also acknowledging that there had been serious lapses in fairness, perspective, and balance. So, social media is not a necessary condition for fake news, but it certainly is a rich environment allowing fake news to thrive, and it's also an amplifier. Social media has drastically, profoundly changed the landscape of news coverage. To the extent that it's hard sometimes to draw a line between traditional news coverage and social media coverage, social news. For instance, the New York Times, when I started, was basically just a print newspaper with a website that wasn't very influential back in 1999. It was less read than the print publication. Well, the opposite is true now. In addition to the website, the New York Times has many blogs and multimedia features, and it has a presence in Facebook and Twitter. And many of the times, journalists also have their own Twitter and Facebook feeds that they use for professional purposes. So it creates a lot more noise and also a lot more space for things to go wrong. And they do go wrong. Mainstream traditional journalists are increasingly relying on Twitter, and this can be detrimental when they use Twitter in place of actual reporting and fact-checking. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In 2012, the conflict between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, November, a social media activist from the Gaza Strip tweeted a photograph of a gravely wounded girl, and he wrote with it, "Pain in Gaza." John Donison, who was a reporter with the BBC, retweeted that image to his nearly 8,000 followers, and he added "heartbreaking." And it was retweeted 95 times, so it reached an untold number of who knows how many people. But the girl in the photograph was not Gazan, she was not Palestinian, she was not located in the Gaza Strip. She was a Syrian child who had been injured a month earlier in that brutal conflict. Another example, May 2014, Haaretz, which is an influential, at least in the English language, Israeli daily, published a completely bogus headline, both online and in print, which stated, Lag BaOmer in Hebron, settlers torch Palestinian orchard. Lag BaOmer is a Jewish holiday which is often celebrated with bonfires. Now, if you read the actual article that went along with this headline, you would see that there is zero truth to the headline. The community had lit a bonfire in a clearing next to an orchard, and no trees were burned. The only thing that was burned was Palestinian and other flags. But that did not stop Peter Beinart, an American journalist, from retweeting that false headline. He didn't even take the trouble of reading the story that he was tweeting, a journalist. And he exacerbated the falsehood by adding to it Lag BaOmer pogrom. In other words, massacre or mass persecution based on ethnicity. And he has 23,000 followers. Well, Haaretz was compelled to correct its headlines and Beinart to apologize. There was an interesting article a few days ago in the New York Times by Farhad Manjoor in which he talked about how Twitter is making news dumber. It exacerbates groupthink, and coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has in any event already been plagued by herd mentality for at least a couple of decades, so this is troubling to understand the impact now of Twitter on top of it. He also points out that Twitter allows for anonymity, and therefore it's awash with bots, which are fake people who are manipulated, who are used by real people to push misinformation, propaganda, or a political agenda. And one Oxford University professor referred to this as manufacturing consensus, which means to create the illusion of popularity around a particular candidate or political idea. And we saw this play out on the ground exactly with the coverage of the Iran deal. I don't know how many people here saw or read the interview with Ben Rhodes, who was President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor. He had a very revealing interview in the New York Times Magazine in March 2016, in which he acknowledged that he created an echo chamber to drum up sympathetic media coverage and create an internet buzz in favor of the Iran nuclear deal. So this is all occurring against the backdrop of news organizations cutting back on their budget for foreign media coverage. That means less staff, less diversity, more reliance on wire services, and at the same time, Foreign Desk is not likely, there's a huge temptation to not send a journalist out in the field on the ground to ferret out little known facts or find a really interesting story that's not being covered elsewhere. Instead, there's the temptation to look at Twitter and what is the trending topic at Twitter. This is a determining factor of what will drive the news agenda. I had a couple points about positive aspects of social media, if
we
I
might not
have
have
the
time for that right now, then we can revisit it after.
So on the upside, and I think that Mark Zell alluded to this, when the mainstream media is not functioning properly, social media presents an opportunity to bypass the mainstream media. And for instance, if the mainstream media narrative is that Israeli commandos are attacking Turkish peace activists who are doing nothing but bringing badly needed humanitarian aid to break an illegal siege on the Gaza Strip, and the Israeli army has information showing otherwise. It did provide that information to the public through social media. We can also use social media platforms to appeal to a journalist's sense of fair play. They become much more accessible to us given their Twitter presence, and or name and shame them. And we can use this tool, leverage it to prompt better media coverage. We do it all the time. We did it with Ben Rhodes, who was the echo chamber Obama official. He appeared in the NewsHour in December claiming, and this is fake news, that Israel is constructing tens of thousands of new settlements. Israel has not built any new communities across the Green Line in some 2 decades, and has a total of just over 200 what are called settlements and illegal outposts combined. So he was way, way off, and this we were able to publicize on social media. It went viral, and it compelled the ombudsman of PBS to call on NewsHour to correct the falsehood. And just this week, one last point, just this week again, we were able to use Twitter to call on Huffington Post Arabic to correct a lot of misinformation about Israel. They did correct, including the false claim that many Israelis, all pro-settlement Israelis envision, aspire to a greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. So Twitter, this was retracted in this Arabic publication, Huffington Post. This is a product of Camera's new Arabic department. So it can be a vehicle for promoting more accurate coverage as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tamar. Very interesting. Okay, we're going to move to Alex now. Alex, you're a journalist, you're in the field, and you've seen firsthand that media is a double-edged sword, as we've just been talking about. So what are the challenges of trying to harness a media that might be inherently biased to spread a positive message about Israel?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm really privileged to be among such informative panelists. I think there's three key terms that were in the question that I just want to highlight at the beginning and will help take us through the answer. The first one, you talk about that the media is biased. The next one is that the media is a double-edged sword. And then you ask, what's the challenge of trying to harness it? All right, so these are three key terms. I'll start with biased. Tamar, you're correct that fake news is not new. However, we are seeing an increasing reliance on fake news. Media has always been biased, which means that whichever journalist is reporting the news is using his filter of what's going on to convey a message to you. That's a bias. Journalism by nature is unfortunately biased. Objective news has gone out the door a long time ago. But there's been a progression of journalism. We went from biased news, filter news, to agenda-driven news. And you see this very regularly on CNN, on Fox News. No longer are we just applying our filter to what's happening, but we actually have an agenda, and we're going to use our time on the TV screen to impact the way the consumers digest the news and make them think what we want them to think. So that's agenda-driven. And when you have agenda-driven news, what happens is that oftentimes the truth doesn't actually fit into your agenda. And if the truth no longer fits into your agenda, well, then you can report what's called fake news. We're going to actually make up the news in order to support and drive home our agenda. So we've definitely seen a progression here from biased news to all-out fake news. And today, even though fake news has been around for a few decades, we're now living in the age of fake news, where it's very, very difficult to understand the difference between real news and fake news. And why is that? Because everybody knows that the best lies are laced with the truth, right? So it's not just that one person says the all-out 100% truth and one person is just lying straight to your face 100%, but rather within a narrative that also involves some degree of truth, there are also lies. And this is what makes digesting news for consumers so difficult today. When you talk about the media also being a double-edged sword and the fact that this is the prophecy in the news conference, well, who was the first prophet? The first prophet was Adam Arishon, Adam, the first man. He was the first man, and he was the first one to talk to God. Now, he had a test. What was his first test? His test was not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And today, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the internet and the media, okay? And we have a choice, both as journalists and as consumers. Do we eat from the tree or do we not? And today, knowledge is information, right? Which is why we have this fake news. So the question is, do we want to turn to the good or do we want to turn to the evil? The choice is always before us. But what makes this much more difficult is that today, the tree is in front of us constantly. It's not like the tree is just in the middle of the garden and we know we're not supposed to go into the middle of the garden, but today the tree is in our pocket. And in fact, we check the tree about 150 times a day, okay? And not only do we check the tree, but Facebook has made it really convenient to just go like this, like this, all day and all night, and when we can't sleep, and as soon as we wake up. And it's very difficult in this age of fake news to even know what's coming through our feed, because Facebook, which I like to call a form of modern social media communism, has put every single media outlet into the same size box with the same size headline, and a consumer really has no idea what's behind Facebook's algorithm that put that piece of news in front of your face at that moment, whether it's 1:30 in the morning or 5:30 in the morning or in between lunch or whatever it is, and you don't even know who's the byline or who's the source of the headline that you just read. And in that way, you're really asking the consumer to be very informed about their ability to consume the news, right? So it's very difficult for journalists and for publications to first fight the Facebook algorithm in order to make sure that your truthful news, or at least what you believe to be the truthful news, to get it in front of the consumers. And then the second thing about truth is that, you know, I read this book called The Power of Trust one time, and it talks about trust being a bucket, right? And the way you build trust is by taking one drop of water at a time and putting it into the bucket. That means in order to build trust, it takes a long time of consistent, truthful effort. Yet, in order to empty the bucket, you could just kick over the whole bucket and just empty the bucket at one time. So building trust is so difficult because as people are going like this, they don't know who's putting the drop inside the bucket. So somebody else can kick over your bucket. It becomes very, very difficult. Now, how do we deal with this, right? So the Lubavitcher Rebbe one time met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before he became the ambassador to the United Nations, and he told him something which is a Hasidic, an idea of Hasidic philosophy, which you can find in the Tanya, which is the Lubavitcher work. And he said that you're going into a house of lies and darkness, right? Now, the only way that you can survive in a house of lies and darkness is to be a single flame of truth, to be a single spark, right? And the Tanya teaches, in fact, that the greatest incremental gain in light is from complete darkness to a single candle, right? Any other increase is not as incrementally great as that first spark of light. So, really, the role of a journalist in the era of fake news is to be the single spark of light. And we know, as the people of Israel, that as one nation amongst many, and living in a dark world, that just to be one spark is actually, it's not only very powerful, but it's actually very attractive. And that's why we see people from all around the world trying to see what's happening in Israel. Why are the Chinese, why are the Koreans looking to see what's going on right in Israel? Because Israel is that one candle, and it's very attractive to look at. Now, just the last point, people have asked me in the past, why is it, how could it be that if you go to the far corners of the world, if you go into Norway or you go into any place, that people are anti-Semitic? There's not even a history of Jews living there, right? How is anti-Semitism reaching to all the corners of the world? And I thought about it long and hard, and it hit me one day that the reason why anti-Semitism spreads across the entire world really starts at home. You know, I asked somebody one time, so what's the center of spirituality in the world? And they said Israel. And I said, good, okay. Now within Israel, what's the center of spirituality? So they said Jerusalem. I said, good. I said, now within Jerusalem, what's the center of spirituality in the entire world? They said the Temple Mount. I said, you're right. The Temple Mount is the center of spirituality in the entire world. And that's why when there was a Jewish temple, we know that the windows of the temple itself were shaped in such a way that they were narrower on the inside and wider on the outside, in order that the light from inside the Temple Mount would shine out, as opposed to the opposite, where the light from outside shines in, right? So the light from the temple shines out to the world. But if you go onto the Temple Mount today, instead of a Jewish temple where a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, is sending messages of Jewish spirituality to the world, if you go inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque on a Friday, you're going to hear the most virulent anti-Semitism that you could possibly imagine. And I live in Arnona, and right across the street from the Arab neighborhood of Sur Baher, and on Friday afternoon, the mosque blasts, and I don't need to be a fluent speaker of Arabic to know that what's coming out of the mouth of the imam is not words of love and peace, but rather it's virulent anti-Semitism. So as long as anti-Semitism is going to be broadcast from our holy places, don't be surprised that fake news and anti-Israel media bias is going to reach the far corners of the earth.
Thank you, Alex. Last we have Amot Ayal, who is the head of a news organization that distributes news. So, Amos, can you bring it home to us? Can you tell us how we change the narrative? How do we take what we've talked about here and put it into action? How do we show Israel's point of view in the media?
So first of all, I think I'm the only one on the panel that English is not my first language, so sorry about that. But I will try to explain a bit how the media works. Tamar and Alex mentioned it a bit, but I will try to explain deeply. First of all, the media today is shrinking. They have less money, they have less reporters, so they need more to lean by a wire service. When you understand that they have one, or in this case, three sources that control kind of in all the news that's going out from Israel, you understand that you have a problem. Three major news outlets, news wires, AP, Reuters, and AFP, today controlling 90% of the information in the world. You can read the New York Times or you can read the Wall Street Journal, both of them leading on news from the wire service. And it's important to understand that Israel never had, not never, sorry, but it didn't have a news agency for the last decade. And all the news came either from the three main news wires or from 9 Palestinians. Palestinians have 9 news wires, including MAN and Wafa, the official one, and they are the source for the news to the world. Now, you can talk a lot about the news and you have a lot of opinions, but in the end, I think most of the people looking for the pictures and the videos from the field itself. And it's important to be there. It's important to take the pictures and to send it first because, yeah, in today's social media world, the first one to send the story, that will be the headlines. They don't have time to wait. And if you will wait to the Palestinian or to the AP and Reuters to send it first, that will be the headlines. I can tell you a story from last year that CBS published an article and the headline was 3 Palestinians killed after alleged knife attack. That was a story about the murder of Hadar Cohen, border police officers that was stabbed near the old city. And everyone was condemning the CBS and attacking them. But no one understood that it wasn't their headline. It came from AP. I know who the person that wrote this headline. And it was also on the article itself, the small letters, AP. But you need to understand it. Another example from just last week, maybe from yesterday, because yesterday it started to be on the news. It was a terror attack near a place called Mavod Datan. It was a soldier was stabbed by Palestinians, girls that was shot after that. And the story from yesterday was about why the IDF soldier didn't treat her, didn't give her a medic treatment. Yes, and Ahmed Tibi spoke about it and other officials, and they condemn Israel by letting her die. But the truth is that the soldier helped her, and we have the pictures. We've been there. My photographer took the picture of one of the soldiers taking off his shirt and trying to stop her blood. And if you are there with your camera and you're sending the pictures, the story is not international now. It's not going to the international media because they got the pictures. They got the truth from the field. And I think maybe I will talk about it, we'll speak a bit about the parasha for next week, not this one. Shlach is about the spooks, sin of the spooks, of the spies, sorry, yeah. Sorry, sins of the spy. I'm talking about this parasha because it's my parasha, it's my bar mitzvah, so I know this parasha. Yeah. So, what were their sins? They saw what happened in their own eyes, and they didn't lie. They just took what they believed that the truth and said it in their subject point of view. But they came from the place that said, we are afraid. We are there and we are afraid and we not believe it is us. And this is the problem here. If you see it in your own eyes, you need to understand what you see. You need to understand the bigger pictures, not just the small, let's say, the zoom in to the place itself. And this is what we're doing in TPS today. We have more than 250 photographers all around Israel and all volunteers that risking their own life to get to these places and to take the picture and send it out. When you're talking about war service, like our service, it's not just by writing the stories. It's going to the places, be there, taking pictures, documenting, filming the videos, and sending it out. And in the moment that we are first,